June 15, 1935. Sunset Gardens Reception Hall, Brooklyn. The wedding of Lucky Luciano's nephew, Carlo Lucania, to his bride, Maria Esposito. 120 guests filled the hall. Family, friends, business associates. 3 long tables covered in white linen. A band playing traditional Italian music. Children running between tables while their parents danced and drank wine. It should have been a perfect night. It almost was. Then Angelo the butcher. Marino ruined it. Angelo was 42 years old, a butcher by trade and an enforcer by reputation. He ran a meat shop in Red Hook and did occasional work for various Brooklyn crews, collections, intimidations, the kind of jobs that required a man comfortable with violence. Angelo had worked with Lucky before, not closely, but enough that he'd received an invitation to Carlo's wedding. Lucky didn't like Angelo, thought he was crude, undisciplined. But in 1935, you invited people to family weddings for political reasons, as much as personal ones. Angelo arrived at the reception already drunk. He'd started drinking at 4 in the afternoon, hours before the ceremony. By the time he walked into Sunset Gardens at 7 p.m., he'd consumed half a bottle of grappa and 3 whiskeys. His face was flushed, his walk unsteady, his judgment non-existent. For the first 2 hours, Angelo mostly kept to himself, sat at a corner table with some other Red Hook associates, drank more wine, got louder with each glass. Lucky noticed but didn't intervene. This was a wedding. People drank at weddings. As long as Angelo didn't cause problems, Lucky would tolerate his presence. But at 9:30 p.m., during the traditional bride and groom dance, Angelo caused problems. Maria Esposito, now Maria Lucania, was 23 years old, beautiful. Her white wedding dress flowed as she danced with her new husband in the center of the reception hall. The band played a slow waltz. 120 guests watched the couple, smiling, clapping along to the music. This was the moment every Italian wedding built toward, the bride and groom's first dance, the symbolic beginning of their life together. Angelo stood up from his table, stumbled slightly, walked onto the dance floor, tapped Carlo on the shoulder. "Let me dance with the bride." Carlo smiled uncomfortably. "Angelo, maybe later. This is our first." I said, "Let me dance with her." Angelo's voice was loud, aggressive. The music continued, but people were starting to notice. Carlo looked past Angelo, caught Lucky's eye across the room. Lucky was sitting at the head table with Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. His face showed nothing. No anger, no concern, just observation. Carlo turned back to Angelo. "Sure, Angelo, one dance." Many details of this era were never officially recorded. If stories like this interest you, feel free to subscribe and stay with us. Carlo stepped aside. Angelo took Maria's hand, pulled her close, too close, started swaying to the music, but his movements were clumsy, drunken. Maria's smile became forced. She tried to maintain distance, but Angelo kept pulling her in. His right hand, which should have been resting respectfully on her back, slid lower, down to her waist. Then lower still. Maria stiffened, tried to step back. Angelo's grip tightened. His hand was now on her hip, fingers squeezing. Then, in full view of 120 witnesses, Angelo's hand moved lower, grabbed her, squeezed. Maria gasped, pushed against Angelo's chest. "Stop." The music stopped. The entire reception hall went silent. 120 people stared at the dance floor, at Angelo the butcher, with his hand where it had no business being, at Maria the bride, trying to pull away, at Carlo frozen, not knowing whether to hit Angelo or wait for permission. Lucky Luciano stood up, slowly. Every eye in the hall turned to him. Angelo, drunk and oblivious to the disaster he'd just created, looked over at Lucky and grinned. Lucky, great party, beautiful bride. Lucky's face remained expressionless. He walked toward the dance floor. Meyer reached out, touched Lucky's arm. "Not here, not at the wedding." Lucky nodded slightly, walked past Angelo without looking at him, took Maria's hand gently, guided her away from Angelo, led her back to Carlo. "Continue the dance," Lucky said quietly. "Don't let him ruin your night." The band started playing again. Carlo and Maria resumed their dance, but the magic was gone. The guests tried to act normal, but everyone was watching Lucky, waiting to see what would happen next. Angelo, too drunk to understand the gravity of what he'd done, stumbled back to his table and ordered another drink. Lucky returned to the head table, sat down. Meyer leaned in. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," Lucky said quietly. "Not tonight. This is Carlo's wedding. I won't ruin it with blood." "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Lucky confirmed. "Angelo learns why you don't disrespect family." June 16th, 1935, 10 a.m. Angelo Marino's butcher shop, Red Hook, Brooklyn. Sunday morning. The shop was open. Angelo always opened on Sundays to catch the after-church crowd. 14 customers were inside when Lucky Luciano walked through the front door. Families buying meat for Sunday dinner. An elderly woman selecting chicken. 2 men discussing cuts of beef with Angelo's assistant. Normal morning business. Angelo was behind the counter, wearing his white butcher's apron, blood-stained from the morning's work. He looked up when Lucky entered, and for a brief moment, through the fog of his hangover, Angelo remembered the wedding, remembered the bride, remembered Lucky's expressionless face. The realization hit him like cold water. His smile disappeared. "Lucky, about last night. I was drunk. I didn't mean." Lucky held up one hand. Silence. Angelo stopped talking. Lucky walked behind the counter, into Angelo's workspace. The butcher block sat in the center, a massive wooden table, scarred and stained from years of cutting meat. Cleavers, knives, and a meat cleaver hung on the wall. The smell of raw meat and sawdust filled the air. "Show me your hands," Lucky said calmly. Angelo hesitated. "Lucky, listen. I'm sorry. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." "Your hands," on the block. The 14 customers had stopped shopping. They were watching now, sensing something terrible was about to happen. Angelo looked around, hoping someone would intervene. Nobody moved. He was alone. Slowly, Angelo placed his hands palm down on the butcher block. They were shaking. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. Lucky reached up and took the meat cleaver off the wall. Heavy, sharp, the same tool Angelo used every day to cut through bone and gristle. "At the wedding," Lucky said quietly, "you touched my nephew's bride. You disrespected her. You disrespected my family." "Lucky, please, which fingers did you touch her with?" Angelo's eyes went wide. I can't remember." Lucky grabbed Angelo's left hand, held it flat against the butcher block. "Let me help you remember." The cleaver came down. Angelo's pinky finger separated from his hand. Clean cut. The finger rolled off the butcher block and hit the floor. Angelo screamed. A woman in the shop screamed. A man grabbed his wife and pulled her toward the door, but nobody left. They were frozen, watching. Lucky held Angelo's hand in place. "That's one. You used more than one finger." "No, please. Lucky, please." The cleaver came down again. Thunk. Angelo's ring finger fell. More blood, more screaming. Angelo tried to pull his hand away, but Lucky's grip was iron. The 14 witnesses stood paralyzed. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't even a beating. This was surgical, controlled, inevitable. "One more," Lucky said. The cleaver came down a third time. Thunk. Angelo's middle finger severed. 3 fingers lay on the butcher block, blood pooling around them. Angelo collapsed to his knees, cradling his mutilated hand against his chest. Blood soaked through his white apron. He was sobbing, hyperventilating, going into shock. But Lucky wasn't finished. He grabbed Angelo's right hand, the hand that had grabbed the bride, and slammed it down on the butcher block. Angelo tried to resist, but he had no strength left. Lucky positioned the hand carefully. Then he raised the cleaver, and brought it down 3 more times. Thunk, thunk. 3 more fingers. Pinky, ring, middle. 6 fingers total. 3 from each hand. All gone. Angelo's hands now had only thumbs and index fingers remaining. The butcher block looked like a crime scene. Blood everywhere. 6 severed fingers scattered across the wood. Angelo was screaming incoherently, no longer forming words, just animal sounds of pain and terror. Lucky set the cleaver down carefully, wiped his hands on a clean towel. Then he bent down, picked up the 6 fingers, and arranged them in a neat line on the butcher block, a grotesque display. He looked at the 14 witnesses, made eye contact with each one. He touched the bride at my nephew's wedding. These are the fingers that touched her. Now everyone will know when you see Angelo with 7 fingers missing, you'll remember what he did, and you'll remember what happens when you disrespect Lucky Luciano's family. Lucky walked out of the butcher shop, left Angelo bleeding on the floor, left the 14 witnesses standing in silent horror, left 6 severed fingers arranged on the butcher block like cuts of meat waiting to be wrapped. Angelo Marino survived. Barely. An ambulance arrived 15 minutes after Lucky left. The paramedics found Angelo unconscious from blood loss. They stabilized him, rushed him to Kings County Hospital. Doctors saved his life, but couldn't save his fingers. The cuts were too clean. The time elapsed too long. Angelo would live the rest of his life with only 4 fingers, 2 thumbs, 2 index fingers. He could no longer work as a butcher, couldn't grip a cleaver, couldn't make precise cuts. The shop closed within a month. Angelo tried to find other work, but everywhere he went, people stared at his hands, asked what happened. And when they heard the story that he'd touched Lucky Luciano's nephew's bride at a wedding, they stopped talking to him. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man stupid enough to disrespect Lucky's family. The 14 witnesses told the story exactly as it happened. They had no reason to lie or embellish. They'd watched Lucky Luciano cut off 6 fingers methodically, calmly, while Angelo screamed. The story spread through Brooklyn, then Manhattan, then across every borough. Within a week, every gangster from Boston to Philadelphia knew Angelo the butcher touched a bride at Lucky's nephew's wedding. Lucky cut off his fingers the next day, in front of 14 people, in Angelo's own shop, with Angelo's own cleaver. Carlo and Maria Lucania never spoke about the wedding incident again. They went on their honeymoon, came back, started their life together. But Maria never forgot. Years later, when her own children got married, she'd warn her daughters, "You see that man at the back with the strange hands? That's what happens when you disrespect people on their wedding day. Your father's uncle made sure justice was served." Lucky Luciano never mentioned Angelo again. Didn't need to. The man was a living example of what happened when you violated the code. Not just the mafia code, the family code. You could steal, you could cheat, you could even kill in this business. But you didn't disrespect a bride at a wedding. You didn't put your hands on another man's wife. And you certainly didn't do either of those things if the wedding was in Lucky Luciano's family. The meat cleaver stayed at the butcher shop, even after it closed. The new owner, who bought the building in 1936, found it hanging on the wall, found the butcher block, with strange dark stains that wouldn't come out no matter how much he scrubbed. Found blood stains on the floor that had soaked into the wood grain. The new owner kept the cleaver, hung it in his new shop, and when customers asked about it, he'd tell them the story. "This is Angelo the butcher's cleaver. This is what Lucky Luciano used, right here on this block." Whether it was the actual cleaver or not, didn't matter. The legend was more powerful than the fact. And Lucky understood that. He'd always understood that. Violence isn't about the act itself. It's about what the act represents. It's about the story people tell afterward. It's about the lesson that gets passed down. Angelo the butcher lived another 23 years after that morning, died in 1958 of natural causes, heart attack, age 65. His obituary in the Brooklyn Eagle mentioned that he'd been a butcher in Red Hook for many years, but didn't mention how or why he'd lost 6 of his fingers. His family knew. His friends knew. Anyone who'd been in Brooklyn in 1935 knew. But nobody wrote it down. Nobody made it official. That's how Lucky Luciano preferred it. Let the streets remember. Let the witnesses tell the story. Let men like Angelo walk around with mutilated hands as living warnings, but don't make it official. Don't give the police or the press anything concrete to build a case on. June 15th, 1935. A wedding. 120 witnesses. 1 drunk enforcer who made a terrible mistake. And the next day, 14 more witnesses watched Lucky Luciano cut off 6 fingers with a meat cleaver and arrange them on a butcher block like cuts of meat. The bride's honor was restored. The family's reputation was maintained. And Angelo the butcher became Angelo the Warning, a man with 4 fingers and a story that every gangster in New York would remember for decades. You don't touch the bride. You don't disrespect the family. And if you do, Lucky Luciano won't kill you. He'll make you live with what you did, visible on your body for everyone to see for the rest of your life. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications for future stories and let us know where you're watching from.